What's up, Trekkies? So I'm going to answer questions that were on my previous Warp Field videos because there seems to be a lot of them. So I was prepared for this because I saw a lot of them and I checked on my computer this morning. And yeah, so I'm just gonna read the comments on my phone if YouTube is being what it wants to do. YouTube app. Anyways, so yeah, this is probably gonna have a little lot of cuts in it. Alright, so let's start with the first video. So, first question. Lita? I'm not even going to try that last name. I already technically answered this one in the comments, but I'll vocalize it. It says, I still don't get how you go up and down with two nacelles. Can you vary the field over the length of the nacelle? And I assume thrusters are useless at warp speed. Clearly, you don't have to drop out of warp to do it since we've seen ships go up and down at warp. I'm thinking Enterprise episode Divergence. Well, as my answer stated, that thrusters are useless at warp because when you're traveling that speed, while yes, a little bit of a can move you a lot, it's not anything that you would see that when what she's Lita Alexander to me is the telepath of Babylon 5, so I'm going to go with that one as a she. As they were talking about, is the Columbia and the Enterprise did this, and they merged their warp fields momentarily because it was a speed level thing. If they dropped below warp, they would have blown up, so he had to fix the thing. But they had to get really close and then have him travel in between, which is perfect for they had to have travel in between them, which is perfect because that tells you that they are in a pocket space because he's not being pulled by space. And you actually see the warp field there for like a little bit for the graphics sakes. And I thought about this question, I've been thinking about it. Also bringing the ships together in that episode was more difficult to merge the warp fields rather than the position of the ships near each other. When I was referencing turning up and down, I meant like more than 20 degrees of movement. They don't actually show this too terribly much in the actual episodes. When you're charting across the entire galaxy or when you're charting across quadrants, you pretty much, you turn the ship and then you go off. You've seen the Enterprise do that. It'll sit here pointing at a planet. They're like, oh, we need to go here. Then it'll go, and it'll angle this way and then shoot off. Because all it does is, it tries to find the best direct route because that's the fastest way, straight line sort of thing. But there are stars and gravitational fields in the way, and obviously we've seen this one in Generations because once the Argosian star blew up, one of the starships had to make a course correction because the gravitational fields in the area were thrown off, so everything sort of shifted a little bit, and that's how they figured out that he was modifying the course of the ribbon. Yes, you have to move around stars, but the best line, that's why they say chart a course rather than just draw a straight line, because you have to go around. That's the answer to that question. They don't really use thrusters. If they have to like completely turn around, they stop out of warp, they flip around. Voyager, I believe, has done that. But the faster you go, the longer it takes to turn around. If you've played Star Trek Online, you know what I mean. You've got like the asynchronous warp field on the Mako engine, or you've got whatever, the Borg engine, transwarp engine. You take a while to turn, so it depends on how fast you're going. Also, if you're doing quantum slipstream and you aren't having like a Vesta with the Obelisk engine, quantum slipstream to most people is just not turning. You find a direct line and you go. So anyways, thank you for the question. Oh, I just have comments. Thomas Wood, you are super Trekkie, and then Rod Garrett, this was super educational. Okay, we're gonna go on to the next video. Dan Acton, oh, gotta make sure this one's big. So here's the theoretical concept. Taking the understanding of warp drive and quantum physics and various other maths, if you took, say, the USS Voyager and added a nacelle to its underbelly, and one from, say, a Galaxy class, yeah, I know it's huge, but work in a second engine room just for this Hemi and the main for the day-to-day ship of the ship. Following weight to power equals torque, huge motor, light ship would warp up much quicker and maintain higher speed than normal warp for long periods of time, turning its factory nacelles into rudders. Actually, the power could would circle back onto itself, and you would need to be, what you need to be is amp to do this, and basically you're using a tenth of the power to maintain extreme high warps indefinitely. Now I'll sit back and watch your brains explode, try to figure this one out. What? I'm not even like, my brain's not even exploding. I literally do not understand this. Like, you know, I was confusing the size difference with the Defiant and Voyager. Like, so we've got the Defiant, and then you have Voyager, and then you have the Enterprise D. And the Enterprise D's nacelles are like this long, and Voyager's like this long. But still, they're huge in comparison. Now, Voyager's warp core isn't that big. It cannot sustain the power necessary. Like, just because you put a Hemi on a Volkswagen Beetle, you know, doesn't necessarily mean it's sort of like the engine isn't different, the transmission's different, or something like that. It's, oh my god. This is not, like, I understand we are dealing with a fictional universe here, but this is still not logical within the fictional universe. Because, it's unwieldy. It's the idea of like, well, you know, what a dagger, or what a long blade, long dagger, I forget what those are called, can do, a claymore does better. But it doesn't really matter, because if you don't, if you've got like, you know, if you've got some squirrely little guy who's like 5'8" and he's swinging like a scimitar, sure, he's gonna, you know, he's nimble. But when you've got like the 6'5", 250-pound Scottish guys that are whipping the claymores around, sure, but your little 5'8" guy's not gonna swing a claymore very well. If he doesn't have the muscle to swing it, doesn't matter how big the sword is, it doesn't matter how big the engine is. Voyager, in this instance, is not designed for that fashion. To add that large of a nacelle on the bottom would, one, destabilize its thing, because it has a narrow, it has a warp field, if you front to back, that looks like this. And I drew that because it's sleeker. When you add another nacelle onto that, on say the bottom, that's like big enough to be, that is that big, you're increasing its vertical this, which means you've got a nacelle outside a nacelle. Yeah, you've got three and it's got an upside down triangle. But when the nacelles aren't balanced, I mean, that's why you don't have two different size nacelles. When the Galaxy X would put on a third nacelle, it was the same size as the other nacelles. So that's the deal with that. I don't necessarily see where you're going with this one. I don't even understand the brackets amp. Power would circle back on itself, and all you need to be is amp. Using a tenth of the power. No. Putting a Hemi on a Prius does not make the Prius go faster. The Hemi uses more fuel. This is why it does that. The Hemi uses more. No. This is, my brain is exploding because of this absurdity, not because of the breaking of physics. Okay, this does break physics, but this is not. This is not. You put a huge motor on a small vehicle, you're not gonna affect it. It's a balance power of issue. So, Jason Millard? I've never known how to pronounce your last name. Excellent video. I had no idea the Starfleet Delta was visual representation of the warp spectrum. Wasn't there also an issue with the mass and or shape of an object traveling in slipstream? Remember, they tested the slipstream on the Delta Flyer because its small size made far easier math, whereas bigger ship made for exponentially more complex calculations to keep this ship stable while traveling through the stream. Yes, it was. I think also that the narrow elongated wedge shape featured on the Dauntless and later Vesta classes, which was based off the Dauntless designs in Voyager's databanks, made optimized slipstreams travel. Yes, the Dauntless is the one where we found quantum slipstream. It's now going to be put in as a ship into Delta Rising. And the best is my little ship. So, slipstream does have complex calculations because you are working at a trans warp. I mean, warp they've got down. It's just like, this is warp field, you know, what I've been teaching you is like first year at the academy. This is freshman stuff. You know, transwarp is stuff that you get into theoretical warp physics, which is like master's degree level doctorate stuff. That's what's going there. Quantum slipstream was completely like, it hadn't even been, like, Federation wasn't even close figuring that stuff out. They were still trying to get transwarp going, for Christ's sake. The Borg had done it. They thought about it. I mean, they kind of got the idea with the Excelsior, but I think the Excelsior in terms was not... I think what they were calling transwarp in Star Trek 3 was not actually transwarp per se. Otherwise, they would have like reworked it. What it was is I believe in Star Trek 3 they hadn't, Paramount and all, Michael Okuda and stuff hadn't redone the transwarp or hadn't done the warp thing. So when they were talking about transwarp, they were just doing cinematics to get, you know, to that this was a ridiculously advanced ship, but it's the Excelsior. If they had actually transwarp way back then with the Excelsior, and the fact that the Excelsior class is still in use with the USS Hood in Next Generation 70 years later, you'd think they'd figured it out. So obviously transwarp is something... Transwarp was probably, in terms of speed, breaking the warp 8 barrier. Because if you think about it, the warp, when they were doing warp 10 in the original series, they were doing 1,000 times light speed. Warp 8, which is what the Enterprise D traveled at, they're like, oh, we need to get there in a hurry but not too fast, warp 8. That was sort of the, I'm gonna speed a little bit, even though their cruising was like warp 6. But they would typically do warp 8 when they needed to get somewhere pretty fast. Maximum warp was like 9.2. Usually maximum warp was like 8, because that's the speed that they could sustain. The fastest speed they could sustain. Much over that was like, you're starting to, you see, as I told you before, the curve is starting to go down. That's the deal with that. So that's all the questions. There's like 3 of them. I don't even think I finished that one. I got confused. Anyways, I will chat with you guys probably next week. Might be a late video depending on what's going on. I may have gameplay video of Delta Rising as we are a week away from launch. Or the servers will be down. And it'll be me of a video just... I have nothing to do. Unless you guys want to ask more questions about the stuff that I talked about here, or whatnot, or something like that. Okay, I will chat with you guys, like I said, next week. Star Trek Online, probably. Delta Rising releasing. Like I said, the servers may be down. I may be just talking about the dev blogs that came out there, like last second stuff. Bye.